Hi, everyone. So now we have a panel with the topic of building a sustainable mobility ecosystem in the wake of COVID. Our moderator today is Jacob Bansgaard, President of the Mobility as a Service Alliance. And then we have Laura Elms, Head of Sustainability at HumanForest, Mark Anderson, Commercial and Customer Director at the Go Ahead Group, and Mark Thomas, VP of Alliances and Marketing at Ridecell. I'd like to say a big thank you to Ridecell for sponsoring this stream. Okay.
Thank you very much. And it's on. Good afternoon, everyone. I am your moderator. My name is Jacob Bangsgaard. I was till yesterday the president of the Mars Alliance, stepped down, and we had an election at the General Assembly. And the new president of the Mars Alliance is Andy Taylor from Cubic, so he might be around. No, otherwise, Roloff, our Secretary General, is down there. So if you have any questions about the Mars Alliance, then Roloff. My day job is Director of Policy and Research for Europe, or the SAE International, an association for automotive manufacturing and engineering. So I have today two of the three panelists. I think we have maybe Mark Thomas joining us later, Mark Anderson and Laura Elms. And I will just ask you to start introducing yourself. Mark, if you start.
Thank you, Jacob. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name's Mark Anderson. I'm Customer and Commercial Director at Go Ahead Group. We're a UK-based operator of bus and rail services in 6 countries across the globe. And it's great to be here today talking about a sustainable mobility ecosystem.
Great, thank you. And I'm Laura Elms, Head of Partnerships and Sustainability at HumanForest. And HumanForest is an electric bike provider, a shared e-bike provider in London, with a real focus on affordability and sustainability. So we try and be the most affordable and the most sustainable in the market. And here's Mark.
Just in time.
All righty. Yes, that's how our mobility works, just in time. So Mark Thomas, I head up our alliances and marketing team at a company called Ridecell. We are a maker of a shared mobility platform. A lot of our customers are focused on car sharing, corporate motor pools, and more efficient utilization of their vehicle fleets.
So, Mark, I will let you, now that you're holding the microphone, and I will let you start. So we're talking here about Mars after COVID. So what can you say some of the things that happened in your business during COVID, and how are we coming out of this post-COVID?
Yeah, really interesting question. So our customers that had B2C or car sharing style services found that initially their ridership went down to 0 when we were all in lockdown. So having the ability to immediately reprioritize those vehicles by having the home zones be circled around the hospitals and offer free rides to essential workers was kind of the first part of serving a demand that we didn't know was going to exist. And then, you know, once people started going out again, the demand for private vehicles versus public transportation just shot through the roof. So we saw that people were keeping their cars much longer because you no longer took a car to the market and then left it, went shopping, and then took another way back because it wouldn't be there, and you were more worried about getting in a public transit kind of thing. Now the thing that we've noticed with some of our customers, like Arval, that's using our platform, is that corporations now, when it's a hybrid workforce, you don't need your company car 5 days a week. You only need it 2 days a week, potentially. And then 5 days a week, you're wanting mobility. So having the demand now for vehicles switching over from, hey, rather than taking the company corporate car, we're seeing people wanting to get rid of that and just switch it over to a mobility budget, letting them do car sharing, Uber, mobility bikes, public transit, and having all of their transportation needs covered.
Laura, micromobility has really increased in the last 3-4 years, and COVID also a certain setback in some of the micromobility services, but the biking went up, and you are representing the electric bikes.
Yes.
And what has happened in that field?
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. So, I mean, micromobility, as you said, went up massively during and post lockdown. I think London saw a 48% increase in the number of bike rides taken. It's still actually only 4% of total rides taken, so there's a long way to go to kind of establishing a system where people use micromobility and bikes specifically in their daily routine. But we did see a lot of people choosing to select micromobility instead of other forms of public transport. And I think a lot of that came down to sort of anxiety about getting back in close proximity to other people. And then as soon as that anxiety maybe translated into genuine habit change and people realizing that actually there were benefits here, not just for their health or their mental well-being, but also financially for their pockets. They were saving a bit of money by doing so. It kind of reinforced it. So we've seen that hopefully kind of come into play. I mean, we had at HumanForest, we had our record number of rides in May this year. So hopefully that kind of habit change is now ingrained enough that we can keep going with it.
And how much does it mean to the consumer? What is the price elasticity of mobility today? How much does it mean to them that they can have a cheaper electric bike than the car that they don't need to use every day?
Yeah,
because
I mean,
before people didn't really care about paying a lot for a car. Do they care today?
I think they do. I mean, if you look at the second-hand car market at the moment, it's crazy. And so there is a lot of pressure more broadly on consumers to find more affordable options. At HumanForest, we offer everyone 10 minutes free every day on our bikes. So the idea there is to not just give it as a one-off. This is something you can truly ingrain into your way of thinking about mobility, which is something Mark and I were talking about before the panel. So I think there is increasing concern around using mobility but thinking about cost. I mean, before we launched in London, the average 30-minute journey on an e-bike was about £6, which is not really something you're going to make a daily habit or a commuting habit. What we're seeing now is that our most popular user is a commuter who uses it to get to and back from the office. So I think there is concern around costs, and that's where we really need to work on kind of building a structure that works for everyone.
Mark, you are representing the bus and train segment.
Yes.
What has happened there? That's the trust from the consumer has been an issue, I guess. And then, how has the reopening been for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, COVID was hugely disrupting to the bus and rail industry. During the peak of the lockdown, we saw ridership decline enormously, as you would expect. But our services kept continuing to make sure that we got key workers out to their workplaces. But I think the interesting thing that's happened is that COVID allowed us to speed up innovation in bus and rail, so that I think now we're more resilient than ever before. There's been huge transformation in terms of the customer experience. Examples would be flexible ticketing, contactless and cashless payment, apps which provide real-time journey information and will even help you understand how busy your train or bus is likely to be. You know, these are features that are relatively new to public transport, and they've really changed the way people use and think about jumping on the bus or train. So what we're seeing now is a big bounce back. We're seeing passengers returning to bus and rail and seeing a new way of using those services. And I think this is really interesting for us in the future, because when you combine the new interest in sustainable travel and climate change, there's a massive opportunity for bus in particular to really be central to the sustainable mobility ecosystems that we're talking about. So we've been on quite a journey, but I think, as an industry, I think we're coming back stronger than ever.
I think if you hand the mic back, I have a question to to all of you, and we can start with Mark there, because you're saying that all the opportunities and there are a lot of innovation happening and making it easier for the travel and so on. I arrived at St. Pancras this morning, and there was a huge queue to the ticketing machine, but someone told me once that I could use a Visa card to, which I then did. I don't know what the, maybe it's more expensive. I don't even know what the cost is because you don't see the cost. But we had a big discussion about this topic yesterday in the Mars Alliance General Assembly. The end user, what do the end user want? And how do you investigate actually what the end user wants, how to adapt your product, your activities to the end user, so focus on the user. And I think everyone could learn from this. How do we, because there are a lot of possibilities out there, but me as a customer coming to St. Pancras, which app do I have to download? I used Google Map. I couldn't find an Uber. I don't know if Uber disappeared from London, but Uber didn't work. So as a consumer, when you arrive in a city, now I know international travels are not the biggest part of the travels for a city, but still, it's difficult for a consumer.
Mobility is very different for people who live in a city and are using it to get around within their home city. They learn where the car sharings are. If they're station-based, they're in neighborhoods. Oh yeah, that's the car I always check out, and you know what app it is because the QR code's on the side. So seeing the vehicles is part of the discovery. You know, landing here, I use the spin, the different kick scooters, and so they have a QR code. It's very easy. Seeing the vehicle is one of the easiest ways to get in for app discovery. We're a Silicon Valley company and have a platform that essentially lets you create any kind of monetization model. So what we're seeing is oftentimes is not the consumer that's getting what they want. People are in this app-oriented society where I want to take a car out and I want it for 2 months. Try and do that at an auto dealership. They'll whisk you in and there'll be a salesman, and there's no 2-month lease. There's 3-year leases or 4 or 5, or they'll want to sell you the car. Being able to have the ability to just download an app, take a picture of your driver's license, choose what class car you want, and then keep it for as long as you need is the new model where you're not making people commit to something that they don't need to commit to because maybe in the summer, they'll be using bicycles because the weather's nice and the e-bikes are essentially almost better than a vehicle. So there's, discoverability by seeing the vehicles, but really getting the established players who are used to a value chain that says you must own it, and getting them to come around and go, hey, this is a convenience that we're used to. How do we offer that convenience now where the insurance is already bundled, where I just download an app and I can take a car for a day, a week, or for months?
Yeah, I would agree with that point on the shared market and how do you structure the shared market so it makes it as convenient as possible for people. So I think part of that, again, we spoke about this, Mark, is creating transport hubs. So how do we create our cities in a way that they're structured that it makes it super straightforward? So whether that be how do you pay across different apps, and can you use your Visa across all of them, or whether it means where do I have to go? So we see with our users, they don't really want to walk for longer than 5 minutes to find a bike. I mean, they don't want to be walking, cycling, and then possibly getting the train or bus afterwards. They want to just have it on their doorstep. So having that discussion with local authorities and policymakers to structure the ecosystem in a way that is most convenient for the user. And then the second point, we did a recent survey of our users, and the most important factor for why they chose to use e-bikes or our e-bikes was around both sustainability and affordability. So there is an interest, obviously, around affordability, which we've spoken about, but also in finding more sustainable solutions. And I think probably as part of a result of the pandemic, people are more increasingly concerned about the environment and their health around air pollution. So I'd say those three things, the convenience, affordability, and sort of sustainability are our end users' priorities, if you like.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what my colleagues have said. I think fundamentally, this is about simplicity. And to really understand users, there's kind of two things that I try and embed into my organization. Firstly, it's about actually thinking like a passenger and forensically understanding the journeys that our passengers are making and addressing any of the pain points that are occurring. So I was chatting with Laura earlier. I mean, I use buses and trains every day. I try every new form of micromobility that comes onto the market to really understand what it feels like as a passenger. And I think it's really important that we all do that in this particular sector. And the second thing is listening to non-users, because it's only when we address those unmet needs that we're really going to grow. And so every year we speak to car users in particular and try and really get under the skin of why they're rejecting public transport and why they're not using shared mobility and why they're not seeing the benefits of active travel combined with bus. So for me, you know, this kind of user-centric approach is absolutely essential. And we just have to immerse ourselves in the customer experience and listen.
And the user expectations, demands, they change as well. And especially now during the pandemic and post-pandemic, people are more flexible. They can work late, they can go to the office later in the day, or they have an alternative to commuting in the morning, they can stay at home. How are the timetables going to change for this? How is the capacity going to change? Because before we were expecting everyone to go in the morning and come back in the evening. How do you deal with this?
Yeah. I mean, the fact is we need to be more agile. We need to change with patterns as they emerge. And so back to my previous point, we are listening closely to what passengers are telling us. We're observing those new trends and behaviors and finding ways to adapt around it. Examples I will give you are around flexible ticketing. So we now have tickets available for people who don't want to buy a week season ticket because maybe they're not traveling at peak 5 days. That was something we introduced very quickly. But there's obviously more we can do as those patterns change. But it's fascinating to see that post-COVID, how much that peak morning has changed. And actually, you know, there are now, there's more availability first thing in the morning. People are spreading out during the day. And that is a good thing overall for public transport because the experience is better.
I have another question for the three of you, and that's concerning trust in your incorporating with competitors, potential partners on sharing data, sharing customers, building new products. And we can start with you because that is where we hear most complaints is with working with the public transport side. What's your experience there about trusting newcomers coming into your market and that you actually will benefit, or even though they might take part of your business as well?
Well, we're talking today about a sustainable mobility ecosystem. And, you know, central to that is the idea of partnerships. We, as shared mobility providers, need to come together to create a viable alternative to the private car. And so to do that, we do need to work closely with different providers. Now, we're doing this already where we can. So, for example, we run buses in Newcastle. we have a partnership with a community car share scheme, so that if you have a bus season ticket, you become a member of the car hire scheme as well. Likewise, in Bournemouth, on our bus app, you can see the availability of shared e-bikes at the bus stop. So we are already working in partnership. There is a trust that exists, and we need to do more of that for sure. We have multi-operator tickets available in some towns. So there is trust there,
Okay.
but I think we need to develop that if we're really going to create a convincing alternative to driving the car, and I would encourage that.
Let's hear from Laura if she agrees, because what you see often when you want to enter the market as a micromobility operator or others, that you see that you have to negotiate city by city, first of all. And second of all, that if you have e-bikes, the city might have a deal with another e-bike provider, so you will not be able to enter that market.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a competitive space to be in. But there was some recent Como data that came out that showed that having competition is really healthy in our sector. If someone picks up one of our competitors' bikes, and then next time they see a HumanForest bike, they might pick up ours. They're just more in the mindset of wanting to use it. So I think in general, we embrace competition. It keeps us on our toes. It keeps us innovating, like we spoke about earlier. But also more generally, I think partnerships are super important. So integrating with things like City Mapper, coming back to that convenience point, but also finding smart ways to partner. So coming back to your earlier question about user habits and behavioral changes, we noticed during the pandemic that people were actually using our e-bikes for a leisure activity, essentially like a socially distant joyride around the park. And that was really interesting because typically micromobility has been used in a very functional last mile sort of solution. Now, post-pandemic, it's gone very much back to the typical sort of commuting, using it 8 a.m., sort of 6 p.m. peaks. So then in our minds, we had to think, okay, how do we partner with someone to balance our fleet a little bit? And so that's where our partnerships with the likes of Deliveroo come in. So thinking less of the end user as you or I jumping on a bike to get to work, and thinking more, actually, how can we help companies as well to embrace sustainable mobility and use our bikes in a way that helps us, but also, of course, helps them as well.
Interesting comment about competition actually makes the market. We found with car sharing, if you want people to get rid of their own vehicle and be wholly dependent upon somebody else's car that may or may not be there, if there's only one service and they don't have access to the vehicle, it's very frustrating. We find when there's two or three, that's the tipping point, because they can, okay, there's no cars on that service, so I'm going to try the next service, and they can generally get to where they're going without being stranded, which is the situation that everybody wants to avoid when they're using a shared mobility situation. But I would also turn this and answer it in a different way. Trust is a different word when you are giving a $40,000 vehicle to somebody who's just downloaded your app. And especially if you're a truck rental company where somebody could use it and fill it up with fertilizer and suddenly, they're a terrorist. So being able to use digital mechanisms and verify that their driver's license is current. Because when you show it to a counter, they look at it, is that you? Yeah. So digital models are actually more secure. And then you can check if they're on a government watch list. So having the ability to bake into that simple app experience things that will protect all of us so that the cars and these expensive vehicles don't get into the hands of people that shouldn't have them.
Let's continue with you, because most of us here, we are more familiar with the developments in Europe, and you also know something about North America. And what do you see are the big differences? What can we learn from North America, and what can you learn from Europe?
I think that we can learn a lot from Europe more. So we have, I think North American governments are the biggest impediment to mobility. The COVID took away the tyranny of the vehicle driver, but it's the parking, street parking. I mean, the city gets a little bit of money from the meters, but you try to take away parking and the people, the voters are like, hey, you got rid of my favorite parking spot. It's my birthright. And taking away a lane and putting in not just a bike lane, but making it wide enough to make it a mobility lane, moving the parked cars over so that the mobility lane's protected. These are all things that the government can do, but they're just now getting the courage to stand up to the voter and the car driver. Because in America, freedom is owning your own vehicle and getting your driver's license when you're 16. And generationally now that's changing, but still most of the people 40 or over want to own a car and get mad when traffic gets more congested for those bicyclists. But once they become a bicyclist, then they're grateful.
That's an interesting point on the tyranny of the car, because I mean, in Europe, I imagine it is much better than North America. I was reading some interesting research about Denmark and how they've managed to get 48% of total trips being taken by bike. I mean, that's huge. We're 4% in London. Like, what are we doing wrong? Fuel taxes are not that much higher than they are here. And the only thing I could really hone down on was possibly cultural. Maybe we're more diverse here. Maybe we need to tackle diversity in cycling in the UK, but also simplicity. And I think we started with this point on simplicity. The lanes need to be consistent. They need to be the same size. They need to not suddenly veer around. They need to be straight. And car users, pedestrians, cyclists, scooter riders need to know where they sit on the roads. And I think there's a lot that can be taken from Europe and to replicated across the UK as well to see those improvements.
If I can just comment on this one point with the bicycles, because there was I think it was last week, there was a former ambassador a US ambassador in Denmark who went on Twitter saying if we don't do something with the fuel prices in the US, then we will have Danish conditions where people cannot afford a car and they go by bike. And Denmark exploded, saying it's not because we can't afford a car, it's because it's more clever to use your bike. And in Copenhagen, it's actually, I think it's up to 67% of the commuting in Copenhagen is by bike now. And I wouldn't commute by car in Copenhagen. I am Danish, so no. It's really a matter of understanding that it's a culture, but it's also the framework conditions that are much more profitable for certain modes. The bicycle is competing with public transport. It's not really competing with the cars.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it is starting to compete with the cars. I think fuel prices going up, cost of living. I'm
just saying Copenhagen.
Oh, in Copenhagen.
Yeah,
sorry.
No. I mean, I don't say in general.
I think another really interesting one is not just the rides themselves, but where do we park our vehicles? So particularly for bike riders, like you're supposed to be on the roads, obviously not on the pavements, but when you park, there's more emphasis on parking on the pavements, not on the roads. So there's a lot of policy, I think, that could shift around that, maybe switching some unused car parking spaces in residential areas, one car park space, 10 bikes, thinking intelligently around that in terms of policy.
And yeah.
Can I just come in on this one
please.
point? Really interesting comments already on this. I think here in London, there are some great examples of bus priority schemes, whether that's bus lanes or bus gates or signal control. But when I look into Europe, I see really great examples of mobility hubs. So this is where the infrastructure is designed to allow different shared modes to come together seamlessly, so that you might have bus meeting bike share or e-scooters or car clubs. And I think that kind of infrastructure change will be really transformative, particularly outside of London, where not everybody is connected to the public transport routes that they are here in London. So I think this idea of mobility hubs is a great learning that we could take in Britain from Europe.
Is there anyone who's burning to ask a question to the panel? We are coming towards the end. Otherwise, I will ask them a question. But if anyone is like, I really would like to know something? No? Okay. Then I will ask the three of you, if you could say, what will your biggest challenge be in the coming year, let's say, for your area to realize or to improve mobility as a service? What will your key challenge be there, and who do you need help from? How can you solve it?
Okay, so I think for me, I spoke earlier about the demand that we're seeing coming back, but we really need to understand more about those new mobility behaviours post-COVID and make sure that our services are delivering what passengers need. I think we're going to have to work in partnership more broadly so that we think of ourselves as not just a bus or rail provider, but really part of that ecosystem. So that's why it's great, to be sitting next to someone like Laura today. And so for me, it's about partnerships.
And Laura?
Great, thank you. I think for us in the micromobility sector, it's really important to get more users. So I think 40% of transport emissions comes from cars. So how do we get people out of the cars and onto bikes or scooters? A big one is affordability, and another big one for us is sustainability. So if we're going to do this and we're going to get the micromobility ecosystem up and running, let's do it in a sustainable way. Let's make sure they're powered by renewable energy. Let's make the operations smooth and efficient. So those two things really for the end user: affordability, sustainability.
And just for that, do you have enough support? Who do you need support from? Is the regulation supporting you enough at the moment now that there's such a focus on sustainability?
That's a good question. So at the moment we're undergoing our B Corp and our Vera accreditation just to kind of give everyone reassurance that we are genuinely doing all we can. There's no greenwashing going on. I think that could be replicated across more of the industry and giving access from policymakers to micromobility providers so that they can get themselves set up and then spend their resource on focusing on that sustainability point.
Mark?
Yeah, for us, we want to get people out of owning their own vehicles. Every car-sharing vehicle on the road displaces about 12 privately owned vehicles. And what we see is we want all the car-sharing vehicles now to be electric. That is the combination of electric vehicles that are shared is a perfect match, because unlike people who live in apartments and they have to park their car in the street, there's nowhere to charge it, having the ability to take the car off site, have it be charged, and then bring it back into the city lets these vehicles be used for probably 3 days on average before they need to be charged again, and that's the time which they need to be cleaned. So it makes electric vehicles accessible to individuals without worrying about having to put in charging infrastructure, because the charging infrastructure is now the bottleneck to mass adoption of e-vehicles in the world today.
We have run out of time. A big applause for the speakers, please. And thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much for joining us for this.